The moment Jack Sullivan opened his front door, his entire world collapsed. Standing before him wasn't the blind date his sister had arranged, but Eliza Winters, the woman he'd spent 20 years trying to forget, the only person who knew why he'd fled their hometown all those years ago. Her familiar hazel eyes widened in recognition, and before he could process the shock, she leaned forward and whispered 7 words that made his heart stop. "You promised to marry me when we were kids." In that instant, Jack felt the carefully constructed walls of his new life begin to crumble, threatening everything he'd built for himself and his 8-year-old daughter, Maya, the daughter who knew nothing about his past or the terrible secret that had driven him away from the only woman he'd ever truly loved. "Dad, who's at the door?" Maya called from the living room, her innocent voice slicing through the tension. Jack stood frozen, unable to respond as memories flooded back. The summer nights by the lake, the pinky promises under starlight, and the tragedy that tore them apart. Eliza's eyes glistened with tears, her hand trembling slightly as she clutched her white cane. "I never thought I'd find you again," she said softly. "But here I am, and I need to know why you disappeared without saying goodbye." The weight of her words hung between them, a burning question that demanded an answer, one that could either heal 2 decades of pain or destroy the fragile peace Jack had finally found. Jack invited her in, his mind racing. How could his sister have arranged this? Did she know? As Eliza moved carefully through his home, her cane tapping gently against the hardwood floors, he noticed how time had changed her. Her once blonde hair now streaked with silver, her face more angular, but still unmistakably the girl who had once known every corner of his heart. Maya approached cautiously, curious about the stranger who had caused such a reaction in her normally composed father. "You must be Maya," Eliza said, turning toward the sound of the child's footsteps with uncanny accuracy. "Your father and I were once best friends, a long time ago." "Dad never talks about his old friends," Maya replied, studying Eliza with interest. "How did you know it was me?" Eliza smiled. "Your footsteps. Light and quick, just like your father's used to be." Jack watched this exchange with growing unease. The past he'd buried was surfacing, threatening the carefully constructed story he'd told his daughter about their family. What would happen when Maya learned the truth about her mother? About the night that changed everything? About the promise he'd made and broken? That evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Jack and Eliza sat in his kitchen, 2 strangers connected by a shared history neither had fully processed. "Your sister didn't set this up," Eliza admitted, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "I found you through an old classmate who mentioned seeing you in the city. I convinced your sister to help me." She paused, her expression hardening. "You owe me an explanation, Jack." 20 years of silence deserves at least that. Jack's hands trembled as he reached for his own cup. "I never meant to hurt you," he began, the words inadequate even as he spoke them. "After the accident, after you lost your sight and Sarah died, I couldn't face you. The guilt was too much. So you ran," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her features. "You left me alone to deal with my blindness, with the loss of my best friend, your girlfriend, and with a broken heart. Did you ever think about what that did to me?" Before Jack could answer, a small voice interrupted from the hallway. "Dad? Who's Sarah?" Maya stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with confusion. Jack felt his heart drop to his stomach as he realized his daughter had heard everything, the beginning of a truth he'd never intended her to discover. The following morning, tension filled the house as Jack prepared breakfast, Maya unusually quiet at the table. Eliza had stayed in their guest room, her presence a constant reminder of unfinished business. "I told Maya that Sarah was an old friend," Jack said quietly as Eliza entered the kitchen, her cane guiding her to an empty chair. "I'm not ready to tell her everything." "She deserves the truth," Eliza replied, her voice gentle but firm. "And so do I." Jack knew she was right, but fear kept him silent. How could he explain that Sarah, Maya's mother, had died because of his recklessness. That the same accident that took Sarah's life had stolen Eliza's sight? That in his grief and guilt, he'd run away with his newborn daughter, breaking every promise he'd ever made? Later that day, while Maya was at school, Eliza suggested they visit the park. As they walked side by side, her hand lightly on his arm for guidance, Jack felt an echo of their old connection. "I didn't come here to disrupt your life," she said suddenly. "I came because I needed closure. For 20 years, I've wondered if you blamed me for Sarah's death, if that's why you left." Jack stopped walking, stunned by her words. "Blame you? Eliza, I was driving the car that night. The accident was my fault. I left because I couldn't bear to see the reminder of what I'd done every time you reached for your cane, every time you stumbled because of the sight I took from you." Eliza's face crumpled. "All this time, you've been punishing yourself?" "Jack, I never blamed you. It was raining, the roads were slick. It was an accident." She reached up, her fingers finding his face with practiced precision, tracing the contours that had changed with time. "But you took Maya and disappeared. You broke your promise to always be there for me, no matter what." Jack closed his eyes at her touch, memories washing over him. The three of them inseparable since childhood, the complicated love triangle that formed as they grew older, his choice to be with Sarah even as his heart pulled toward Eliza, the promise made under an oak tree when they were 10 that someday, somehow, they would marry each other. "I didn't know how to face you," he whispered. "When Sarah told me she was pregnant, I chose to be with her, to do the right thing. Then the accident happened, and suddenly I was a single father with a newborn, responsible for destroying 2 lives. Running seemed easier than staying." Eliza stepped back, her expression hardening. "You didn't destroy my life, Jack. You abandoned it. There's a difference." She turned away, her posture rigid. "I think I'd like to go back to the house now." When they returned, Jack was shocked to find Maya home early, sitting on the front steps. "School let out early," she explained, her eyes moving between the adults with unusual perception for an 8-year-old. "Dad, is Eliza the reason you never talk about before we moved here? Is she the reason you get sad on my birthday every year?" The question hung in the air, a moment of truth Jack couldn't avoid. This was the crossroads, continue the lies or finally face the past he'd been running from. With a deep breath, he made his choice. "Yes, sweetheart. Eliza, your mother Sarah, and I grew up together in a small town far from here. We were best friends, and then, more complicated than that. There's a lot I haven't told you, things I should have shared long ago." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Like what happened to my mom? You always just say she's in heaven." Jack knelt before his daughter, taking her small hands in his. "Your mom died in an accident the night you were born. The same accident that took Eliza's sight. I've carried that guilt for so long that I couldn't bear to talk about it, even with you." As the three of them moved inside, Jack began to share the full story. How he and Eliza had been inseparable as children, making innocent promises of marriage, how as teenagers their friendship had evolved into something deeper but unspoken, how Sarah had entered their lives and complicated everything, how he'd chosen Sarah when she became pregnant, and how one rainy night had changed all their destinies forever. "After the funeral, I couldn't face staying," Jack admitted, his voice breaking. "I took you and left without saying goodbye to anyone, not even Eliza. It was the most cowardly thing I've ever done." Maya listened with remarkable composure, occasionally glancing at Eliza, who sat with quiet dignity, her unseeing eyes fixed on some middle distance. When Jack finished, the silence stretched between them until Maya finally spoke. "Did you love my mom?" she asked simply. Jack nodded, then remembered to speak aloud for Eliza's benefit. "Yes, I did. Sarah was wonderful, creative, spontaneous, full of life. You have her smile, her curiosity." "But you loved Eliza too," Maya said, not a question but a statement of fact that startled both adults. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Jack began, but Maya shook her head. "Adults always say that when they don't want to tell the truth," she said with the devastating clarity of childhood. "I think you still love her. I see how you look at her, even though she can't see you back." In the silence that followed, Eliza stood abruptly. "I should go," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "This was a mistake. I came looking for answers, not to disrupt your lives." She reached for her cane, her movements suddenly hurried. "Please don't leave," Maya said, surprising everyone. "Dad's been sad for as long as I can remember. But since you came, he laughs more. I heard him last night, when you were talking about the time you both got caught stealing apples." Jack felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt he'd carried for 2 decades. Looking at his daughter's earnest face, he saw not just Sarah's features but a wisdom entirely her own. And looking at Eliza, he saw not the burden of his guilt but a woman who had overcome tremendous challenges, who had found him despite everything. "Stay," he said simply. "Not forever, if you don't want to. But long enough for us to figure out if there's still something worth saving here." The next morning, Jack woke to the sound of laughter from the kitchen. He found Maya perched on a stool, watching in fascination as Eliza expertly cracked eggs into a bowl, her movements confident despite her blindness. "She's teaching me how to make French toast," Maya explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "Eliza says it was your favorite when you were my age." Jack leaned against the doorframe, struck by the domesticity of the scene. "It still is," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Though I haven't had proper French toast in years." Eliza turned toward his voice, a small smile playing at her lips. "Some things never change," she said softly. "You still sound exactly the same when you first wake up, like you've swallowed gravel." The casual intimacy of her observation hit him like a physical blow. How many mornings had they shared as teenagers, sneaking out to watch the sunrise by the lake? How many times had she teased him about his morning voice? The memories flooded back, not with the usual sting of regret but with a bittersweet warmth. As they ate breakfast together, Jack noticed how Maya watched Eliza's every move with undisguised fascination. "How do you know where everything is?" she asked, as Eliza reached unerringly for the maple syrup. "Practice," Eliza explained. "And I pay attention to sounds, smells, the feel of things. When you lose one sense, the others become sharper." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like me to show you what it's like?" Maya nodded eagerly, then remembered to speak. "Yes, please." After breakfast, Eliza tied one of Jack's scarves around Maya's eyes as a blindfold. "Now, I want you to try to navigate from the kitchen to the living room," she instructed. "Use your hands if you need to, but try to rely on your other senses first." Jack watched as his daughter took hesitant steps, her hands outstretched, her face a mask of concentration. When she bumped into the coffee table, letting out a small yelp of surprise, Eliza was immediately at her side, her own navigation flawless. "It's okay," she said gently. "That's how we learn. Now, before you move again, listen. What do you hear?" Maya stood still, her head tilted. The clock ticking. Dad's breathing. A car outside. Good. Now feel the air. Is there a draft from any direction? That might be a doorway or window. As the impromptu lesson continued, Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He'd spent years protecting Maya from the truth, from the pain of his past, but in doing so, he'd also sheltered her from the possibility of knowing Eliza, this remarkable woman who had turned her tragedy into strength, who had more courage in her little finger than he'd shown in 20 years of running. That afternoon, while Maya was at a friend's house, Jack found Eliza sitting on the back porch, her face turned toward the sun. "She's an amazing child," Eliza said as he sat beside her. "You've done a good job with her, Jack." "I've done my best," he replied. But I've also kept her from knowing half of who she is. Sarah's parents don't even know they have a granddaughter. I cut all ties when I left. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Why did you really leave, Jack? Was it just guilt, or was there more? The question hung between them, demanding a level of honesty he'd avoided for decades. Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself. The night of the accident, when they told me Sarah didn't make it, my first thought, God help me, was relief. The confession tore from him like a physical wound. Not because I didn't love her, but because I'd been living a lie. I was going to marry her for Maya's sake, do the right thing, but my heart was always with you. And then, in an instant, Sarah was gone, you were blind, and I was a father. The guilt of that relief, of knowing I'd wished for a different life even as Sarah lay dying. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't face you knowing that part of me had wanted to be free of her. Eliza's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. Oh, Jack, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We were so young, all of us. Making impossible choices, trying to do what we thought was right. She squeezed his hand. I had my own guilt, you know. I was jealous of Sarah, even as I loved her like a sister. When she told us she was pregnant, I smiled and hugged her, but inside I was breaking. What kind of person feels that way about their best friend's happiness? A human one, Jack said softly. We were caught in an impossible situation. But we didn't have to face it alone, Eliza countered. That was your choice, Jack. You took that option away from all of us when you disappeared. The truth of her words stung, but Jack couldn't deny them. I know, he admitted. I've had 20 years to regret that decision. To wonder what might have been if I'd stayed, if we'd faced it together. And what do you think would have happened? Eliza asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jack looked at her profile, gilded by the afternoon sun. I think it would have been messy and painful and complicated. I think there would have been days when the grief felt unbearable. But I also think we might have found our way through it, eventually. Together. Eliza turned toward him, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his with unerring accuracy. It's not too late, you know. For some things, at least. The days that followed brought a gradual thawing, a careful reconstruction of trust. Eliza taught Maya how to navigate the world as she did, through sound and touch and memory. Jack watched as his daughter guided Eliza through the garden, describing the colors of flowers with poetic precision. He found himself remembering not just the tragedy that had separated them but the joy that had preceded it, the summers by the lake, the promises made in childhood, the connection that had never truly broken despite his best efforts to sever it. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Maya asked the question Jack had been dreading. Can we visit where Mom is buried someday? The knife Jack was using to chop vegetables stilled. He glanced at Eliza, who had paused in her task of kneading dough, her head tilted in his direction, waiting. Yes, he said finally. I think it's time we did that. All of us, if Eliza wants to come. I'd like that, Eliza said quietly. I never got to say a proper goodbye to Sarah. Later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Jack found Eliza in the living room, her fingers tracing the spines of books on his shelf. You still read the same authors, she observed. Some things never change. Some things do, he countered, moving to stand beside her. I'm not the same man who left you, Eliza. I've grown up, finally. Learned some hard lessons about running from pain instead of facing it. Eliza's fingers found his arm, traveling up to his shoulder, then his face. I've changed too, she said softly. Blindness teaches you patience, teaches you to see beyond surfaces. I've had 20 years to think about us, about Sarah, about what happened. 20 years to forgive. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Jack whispered. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Eliza replied. It's about letting go of the past so it doesn't poison the future. Her hand dropped from his face. I didn't come here expecting to find us again, Jack. I came for closure. But being here, with you and Maya, it feels like something I didn't know I was missing. 2 weeks later, they made the journey back to Oak Ridge, the small town where it had all begun. Jack drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as familiar landmarks appeared. Maya pressed her face against the window, absorbing every detail of the place where her parents had grown up, where her mother was buried. Eliza sat quietly in the passenger seat, occasionally commenting on the scents that drifted through the open window, pine trees, freshly cut grass, the distinctive mineral smell of the lake. It hasn't changed much, Jack observed as they passed the town square. Small towns rarely do, Eliza replied. Though I hear they finally tore down the old movie theater. Where you had your first kiss with Tommy Wilkins, Jack said, a hint of the old teasing in his voice. Eliza laughed, the sound lightening the tension in the car. While you watched from behind the popcorn counter, green with jealousy. I was not jealous, Jack protested, then caught Maya's curious gaze in the rearview mirror. Okay, maybe a little. They checked into the only hotel in town, a quaint Victorian building that had been there since Jack and Eliza were children. After settling in, they walked to the cemetery on the hill overlooking the lake. Jack carried a bouquet of white lilies, Sarah's favorite, while Maya clutched a small teddy bear she'd brought to leave at the grave. The headstone was simple, Sarah Elizabeth Collins, beloved daughter and friend, forever in our hearts. Jack realized with a pang that there was no mention of her being a mother. He'd left before the stone was placed, and no one had known about Maya. As they stood before the grave, Jack felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. I should have brought you here long ago, he said to Maya, his arm around her shoulders. Your mother would have loved the person you're becoming. Maya leaned against him, her eyes fixed on the headstone. Tell me about her. Something you've never told me before. Jack thought for a moment. She could sing like an angel, he said finally. But only when she thought no one was listening. If she knew you could hear, she'd clam up immediately. Eliza and I used to hide outside the bathroom window when she was in the shower, just to hear her. Eliza smiled at the memory. She had the most beautiful voice. She could have been on stage, but she was too shy. She loved thunderstorms, Jack continued. While everyone else was taking cover, she'd be out on the porch, watching the lightning, counting seconds between flashes and thunder. You were born during the biggest storm of the year, he told Maya. Your mom said you were announcing your arrival with fireworks. They stayed by the grave for nearly an hour, sharing stories, laughing through tears, healing old wounds. When they finally turned to leave, Jack felt lighter than he had in years, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. That evening, they visited the lake where they'd spent countless summer days as teenagers. The old dock was still there, weathered but sturdy. Jack helped Eliza navigate the uneven boards until they reached the end, where they sat with their feet dangling over the water, Maya between them. This is where you promised to marry me, Eliza said suddenly, her voice soft with memory. We were 10. You gave me a ring made from a twisted dandelion stem. Jack smiled. And you said we had to wait until we were at least 30 because you wanted to see the world first. Ironic, isn't it? Eliza's laugh held no bitterness. I lost my sight but found my way around the world anyway. I've been to more countries blind than I ever visited sighted. Maya looked up at her with admiration. Really? How? I work as a consultant for companies developing technologies for the visually impaired, Eliza explained. I travel to test their products in different environments, different cultures. It's challenging, but rewarding. That's amazing, Maya said. Dad, did you know Eliza was so cool? Jack laughed. I always knew she was extraordinary. Even when we were kids, she was the bravest person I knew. As darkness fell, they made their way back to the hotel. Maya, exhausted from the emotional day, fell asleep almost immediately. Jack and Eliza sat on the small balcony outside their adjoining rooms, sharing a bottle of wine and more memories. "I saw your parents today," Eliza said after a comfortable silence. "They were at the grocery store. I recognized your mother's voice." Jack stiffened. "Did they see you?" "No. I ducked into another aisle." She hesitated. "They should know about Maya, Jack. She's their granddaughter." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I've thought about contacting them so many times over the years, but the longer I waited, the harder it became to explain why I'd stayed away." "They lost their daughter," Eliza said gently. "Don't let them lose their granddaughter too." The next morning, Jack stood on his parents' doorstep, his heart hammering in his chest. Maya held his hand tightly, her eyes wide with anticipation and nervousness. Eliza had offered to come, but Jack felt this was something he needed to do alone, with Maya. When the door opened, his mother's face went slack with shock. "Jack," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Is it really you?" "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Maya. Sarah's daughter." The reunion was tearful, joyous, and painful all at once. There were recriminations and questions, hugs and tears, stories shared and apologies offered. By the end of the day, Maya had acquired not only grandparents but a room full of photos of her mother at every age, stories about her childhood, and the promise of regular visits. As they prepared to return home the following day, Jack felt a sense of completion he hadn't expected. This journey back had been about more than making peace with the past, it was about creating a future that honored it. One evening, as Maya slept, Jack and Eliza sat on the porch swing, the gentle creaking a counterpoint to their conversation. "I forgave you years ago," Eliza said quietly. "I had to, for my own sake. But I never stopped wondering where you were, if you were happy, if you ever thought of me." "Every day," Jack admitted. "I would see something beautiful and wish I could describe it to you. I would hear Maya laugh and remember how your laugh always made everything better." He paused, gathering courage. "I've spent 20 years running from what happened, but also from what might have been. From us." Eliza turned toward him, her face illuminated by moonlight. "And now? Are you still running?" Instead of answering, Jack took her hand and placed it against his heart. "Feel that? It's finally slowing down after 20 years of running. I'm ready to stand still, Eliza. I'm ready to keep the promise I made under that oak tree, if you'll still have me." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks as she leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. "I came here for closure, not for a new beginning," she whispered. "But maybe they're the same thing." Their lips met in a kiss 2 decades overdue, gentle and questioning at first, then deepening with the certainty of coming home after a long journey. When they parted, Jack saw in Eliza's smile the future he'd been too afraid to imagine. Not a perfect one, not an easy one, but one filled with possibility and healing. 3 months later, Jack and Maya helped Eliza move into their home. 6 months after that, under the same stars that had witnessed their childhood promise, they exchanged vows in a simple ceremony with Maya as their only attendant. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, there were adjustments, arguments, moments when the past threatened to overshadow the present. But there was also laughter, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives even the longest separations. On quiet evenings, Jack would describe the sunset to Eliza in meticulous detail while Maya drew pictures of their family, past, present, and imagined future. They visited Sarah's grave together, honoring her memory and her place in their story. Slowly, the guilt that had defined Jack for so long transformed into something gentler. A responsibility to live fully in honor of what had been lost, to create joy where there had been sorrow. Sometimes, the most beautiful stories emerge from our deepest wounds. Jack and Eliza's journey reminds us that it's never too late to face the past, to forgive ourselves and others, to find our way back to the promises we once made. If this story touched your heart, remember that second chances often arrive in unexpected ways. We just need the courage to open the door when they knock. Share this message with someone who might need to hear it today, and stay connected for more stories that remind us of the healing power of love and forgiveness.